You know, I remember when the Mortal Kombat Legacy Collection was announced first, and a lot of the comments would be disappointed because there was no PS2 trilogy, there was no Shaolin Monks. Some even lamented that the Deadly Alliance game was actually the one for Game Boy Advance, and I did not mind just getting the 2D classics and Mortal Kombat 4, although I mean, the lack of MK Gold, even if MK Gold is, of course, broken and what have you. I really liked the idea of having a way to play MK Gold in an official way, and I was willing to wait things out. Handling the sprites of the 2D Mortal Kombats and the primitive 3D technology of Mortal Kombat 4 was gonna be kind of a testing ground, in my headcanon at least, for Digital Eclipse, so that once they get that one out of the way and the boomers are satisfied, the late millennials such as myself can then wait for a bit and get the Mortal Kombat trilogy and the PS2 and the Shaolin Monks, and everything is going to be just fine in the end. Of course, that's not what happened. The Legacy Collection turned out to be a bit of a disaster. Pretty much no online features to speak of. Steam, at least in the short period that I played it, was very prone to straight up not working. You got the input lag, you got the glitches, the inconsistencies, everything that would make an emulation faulty was there. And for $50, that's really a hard pill to swallow. I know some people are happy because, you know, maybe they're just more casual players that wanted to go through the arcades, maybe play local multiplayer with their friends. You know, good for them. I still think $50 just for that is way too much. And I'm not even one of those people that goes like, oh, why are you paying for a bunch of ROMs when Fightcade exists? I have emulated more games than probably most of the people who are going to watch this video. But if a company is willing to put in the effort to put out a collection of their classics, give it a new fancy coat of paint, I don't mind shelling out. And I was more than willing to shell out for this collection, but of course, I had to get it refunded because it was barely playable. Anyway, the reason this video exists is because I don't expect a PS2 collection to happen anytime soon after the first one. And I kinda want to do some theory crafting about what it would look like if a competent team were in charge of this product. It's really funny, I always confuse Night Dive and Digital Eclipse for some reason. Sometimes I will see the Digital Eclipse logo on something and I would get all excited. Then I would get reminded that I'm thinking of the wrong company and I would get really sad. So yeah, no, we're getting theoretically if I was in charge of Warner Bros. And I wouldn't want the Mortal Kombat brand to completely shatter itself to pieces with each passing release. I would give the PS2 remasters to Night Dive because, you know, they would be remasters, okay? The first Legacy Collection, I was okay with the games not being properly remastered because first off, there is so many of them, and also because there isn't really a lot to remaster in a 2D fighting game from the mid-90s. You could maybe improve some of the graphics in a very minimal way without turning it into a completely different game. But for the PS2 games, it's a very different matter, because even if you do try to emulate them, upscaling the resolution and putting on all the bells and whistles that you can think of, they're going to look like shit, at least in the current state of things with the PS2 emulator. The UI is very blurry, it's full of artifacts. Nothing looks quite right as if you were to play it on original hardware. So yes, this trilogy definitely needs some facelifting to make it more palatable if you were to put it in a collection. You can just take the games as they are and plop them on Steam or whatever else. If, you know, the developers had the source code, I don't really think that would be a huge problem. I am a game developer, but I have no, like, proper idea of how remastering a game from so many years ago would work. But, you know, Night Dive definitely has a good track record, so I'm sure they're gonna find a a proper solution. I don't really want like a massive overhaul of the graphics. I don't think most people would want that either. The graphics, like they're fine, you know, they have a very unique charm to them that, you know, you love it or you hate it. But I imagine if you want to buy this collection, you probably will like the art direction. I just want, you know, better sprites, better texture resolution, maybe some minor things like better draw distance for stuff like the conquest mode. Very minor shit. I wouldn't want to, like, from a graphical standpoint, to completely make everything from scratch. I just want what I grew up with, but better. And I think most people would agree with that. But that's just the graphics, because when it comes to the gameplay and the content, I'm a huge fan of these games, but there is a lot that needs to be addressed. And most of it is in the form of cut content. It's not a secret by any means that both conquest modes from Deception and Armageddon have a ton of content that didn't make it past the cutting room floor. Particularly the one for Armageddon, there was this beta footage making the rounds. I will probably put it in the video that shows that the player was able to use the sword whenever he wanted, and that there was also a bow and arrow that he could use. And I imagine that's far from the only thing that he could do in this mode. Clearly looks like there was a lot that was taken out at the last second and stitched together the best way the developers could. And I'm not saying this like to criticize Conquest. Either for Deception or Armageddon. Like, they are excellent side pieces for games that already have a ton of content to them that could exist just fine with the crypt and the mini games and the arcade and what have you. I'm just saying, there could be more. And if you were to give Night Dive all the assets they needed to finish up the stuff that Midway couldn't back then, I think that would be a huge for the fans. I went a bit to the cutting room floor a while ago. I'm sure there is like a few dialogues and missions, even in Deception, that couldn't get implemented. And that's the stuff that we could get with data mining. So of course, if they get someone who worked on the games back then, I'm sure there is going to be a much longer list of stuff that they could add. And I think everyone will agree that seeing this kind of stuff getting restored would be really cool. You know, it would give a new life to games that many of us have played 1,000 times already. But there is one aspect that I think is a bit more controversial, and that is the competitive side of things. I'm not really good at fighting games in general. I can barely make it through the arcade ladder in the PS2 Mortal Kombats, which are a lot easier than the ones for the older consoles. So I don't want to speak like I am an expert on this. In fact, I would more like frame this as a question rather than just my opinion. Would you be willing to maybe see a lot of like fixes and improvements to the balance of the games? Maybe fixing all of the infinites, making some characters that were too strong a bit less strong, and vice versa. Just balancing things out. You know, maybe they can consult some of the competitive players, which I know aren't many. I know that this era of Mortal Kombat isn't particularly popular in the competitive scene. But, you know, if you were to try and make it more competitive, try to get to Evo or something like that, I think it would be fun to have something like, I don't remember if it was like Hyper Fighters or Super Turbo, where in Street Fighter you could select which version of the character you wanted to play. And of course, you know, for tournaments and stuff like that, you would have to pick up the one that is more balanced. But if you want to just fuck around online with your friends or even in ranked, you could be able to pick the broken characters. Sounds like a lot of work, you know, realistically. You know, if I were in the director's chair, if I wanted to give life to this collection past the nostalgia factor, if I wanted it to become a competitive mainstay, I think some changes would have to be made, probably. Again, not an expert. I'm sure a lot of you will have your opinions, those of you who play online, and probably have fond memories of that period, and didn't care that, like, X or Y was overpowered, or something like that. Something worth pondering over, regardless. If these were all the changes that were made to the games, I think I would be pretty happy. but if I have to be greedy, and if I have to ask one more thing that I would add to the PS2 trilogy, it would be a tag mode. Mortal Kombat 9 is my favorite when it comes to pure gameplay. I have a few issues with the story. I'm not really a fan. I like the tower, but it's nowhere near as good as the Conquest mode from Deception and Armageddon. And the lack of minigames is a bit disheartening, but gameplay-wise, just like fighting and doing stuff, that was my favorite of the series, and a big part of it, even if again I wasn't terribly good at it, but the tag mode. I'm a huge fan of Dead or Alive. I think tag matches in fighting games, even if it's not the primary meta or whatever you wanna call it, especially in Armageddon where the movesets are so limited. If you want to create more variety within a match, tag mode would be huge. You don't even have to add it for Deadly Alliance or Deception. Even just giving something that would add so much more variety to the matches in Armageddon. That would be great. I know this stuff is difficult to implement, and you would have to come up with a lot of combined moves with various combination of characters. I know it's a lot of work, okay? This is just a wish list. This is just me theory crafting, but tag mode for Armageddon would make it better in so many ways that it's not even funny. I know that a lot of people prefer Deception over Armageddon, and I understand that. Armageddon, it's very gimmicky. The Conquest mode maybe not as good. The characters, having lots of them is fun, but with so few moves that you could choose from, that kind of takes the fun away. I think if you want to fix that issue, tag mode is perfect. And I'm pretty sure that's it out of the things that I would want. Of course, there is other details, like, having more stuff in the crypt, and of course, all the online features that they weren't in the Mortal Kombat Legacy Collection for the 2D games. Of course, that would have to be in this one. Even if, $50, assuming this is gonna be the price for the collection, I would be more willing to not have as many online features for these ones because they're more single player oriented, but they should be still there, okay? I really don't think that's an excuse, especially given that these games already had online. I think 2 of them did. I don't know if the Alliance had online multiplayer. The infrastructure is already there. There is ways you can even play the online to this day. I'm pretty sure I've seen someone play Mortal Kombat Armageddon online a while ago. It's definitely possible, and I don't think it should be as much work as with the first collection, because of course you wouldn't have to set up for as many games, and you wouldn't have to do as much work to set up the online. Thanks for watching. Tell me if you agree or if you disagree. I'm spouting a lot of nonsense, I'm sure. When I'm gonna be editing this down, I will try to make it seem as clean and as normal as possible. Regardless, see you all next time.